Hi, my name is Ashley Muntz, and I'm the Clinical Program Director here at the Center for Children and Families. We are in one of our therapeutic playrooms. Our counseling services department is just one of the many services that we offer here at the center for families and children who are going through some difficult times. And so today I'm here to talk about a topic that may be on a lot of people's minds right now, having to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know those are big words and they might be scary for some people, but I'm here today to just sort of give kind of a top-down overview of some major topics that might come up in your parenting journey, and to try to give you some confidence to be able to kind of meet those things head on. A little bit about me. I am a licensed professional counselor supervisor in Oklahoma, where the center is located in Norman, and I have worked in this field about 7 or 8 years, doing various things. I am endorsed as an infant family specialist, as well as a licensed school counselor here in Oklahoma. I just do a lot of things to help families. I'm very, very passionate about parent education in general. A lot of the work that I've done over the past couple of years has just been in the field of educating parents about a variety of different things. The subject of diversity in general is something that I'm very, very passionate about. A lot of my professional education and professional development since I graduated has been in areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm very, very thrilled to have the opportunity to speak today to parents about this issue. It really brings together like two of my really big passions. So I'd like to start out just talking a little bit about diversity. It really is kind of a buzzword right now, but I kind of just want to break it down a little bit. A lot of people have different ideas about what the concept of diversity is. And depending on sort of the topic or the arena or the population that you're like absorbing information from or learning about, diversity can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But diversity in the broadest sense is simply how we are different. And there are so many facets to diversity. One of the biggest in the news right now, and a lot of the talk and the social commentary lately has been about race as it relates to racial justice and equity in the United States right now. And certainly race is huge on the menu of what people in the mindset of diversity are thinking of right now. And so just to kind of frame that conversation a little bit, diversity can apply to differences in race, differences in culture, differences in religion, differences in affectional orientation, that is, GLBTQI orientations, as well as gender identity, as well as the way a person dresses. If they dress according to a certain stereotypical gender role, gender nonconforming individuals may not dress in the certain types of clothes that are appropriate for their sex assigned at birth. Neurodiversity, which are people who may have autism, ADHD, anything having to do with differences in how people process information or have sensory processing differences, as well as disability in general, people who use wheelchairs, people who utilize mobility aids in any sort of way, the deaf population, people who are blind. All of that is in the scope of diversity and is sort of in the scope of what we're talking about today. Another aspect of diversity are diverse family types, adoptive families, foster families, one-parent families, either for single-parent households or grandparents raising grandchildren, children being raised by aunts and uncles, families who do not have children, that choose not to have children, or struggle with infertility, those types of issues, children who have a parent who has died. All of those different makeups of families also represent diversity in the sense that we're all different. There are so many different aspects of life that families and people that you and your child encounter, they're going to have differences. And in a little bit later, we're going to talk about some common mistakes that parents make in addressing those differences or not addressing the differences, as well as some tips that might be easy to kind of hang on to in your future conversations and planning to have these conversations with your kids in an appropriate way. So now that we kind of have a general idea of just the amount of difference that diversity can cover, I want to talk a little bit about some misconceptions or some mistakes, or maybe just some fears that parents might have in addressing these things with their children. I think first and foremost, it's important to say that we're always doing the best that we can as parents. And none of this is meant to call people out or to make you feel bad about what you have done or you haven't done. There's a reason that you're watching these parenting videos. There's a reason why you're attending this conference, and that is to try to learn and try to grow. And so please don't interpret any of this talk today as sort of calling you out on something you have or haven't done. But we are going to talk about some hard things. And so first and foremost, I want to say that as you think about approaching some of the topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion with your children, first and foremost of importance is your own learning about these topics, your own comfortableness with speaking about them, your own confrontation of yourself of any biases that you might have. And a lot of times, the vocabulary and the words and the language that we use to teach our children about any topic come from the vocabulary and the language that we were taught by our parents. And not a lot of people lived in homes that were necessarily comfortable or very efficient about talking about these topics. And so for a lot of parents, I know certainly for myself, it is very hard to kind of come up with the right words when you may not have had a lot of guiding or modeling on how to have these conversations. So I just want to acknowledge that if you're feeling like, I don't know what to say, I don't want to say the wrong thing, no one ever talked to me about this, you're not alone. And also, if the information in this talk today kind of goes against some of what your parents or your guardians, your caregivers kind of passed on to you, that doesn't mean that they are bad. That doesn't mean that your parents had any ill intention. But when you know better, you do better. And so that's what I'm hoping that we can have this conversation today to sort of just broaden those horizons for the next generation of kiddos. So the first misconception that I'd like to address is this idea that by not talking about diversity, not addressing racism, not addressing sexism, that somehow that shields or protects children, that we want to preserve their innocence. And again, we're always wanting to do the best we can by children. So this is a very, very, very popular idea, is that somehow by talking to children about this, we will sort of burst the bubble on their protective world, or that we will maybe actually make our children racist or make them sexist or make them discriminate against people with disabilities by talking about it. And I'm here to assure you that those things are actually myths. Likely, if you have the mindset that you're shielding or protecting your child from sort of the ugliness of the world, that you want to kind of keep them protected from racism, for instance, you're likely part of the dominant culture. People that have disabilities, people of color, people who are gay, lesbian, transgender, people who are neurodiverse, those families and those children, they don't have the ability to sort of ignore or tune out issues of diversity and equity and inclusion, because that's their reality. And so if you are in a position that you want to shield and protect your child from those types of conversations, I'd like you to just try to dig in a little bit and think, is that because my family might come from a place of privilege? Are we a white family? Are we family that does not have someone of a disability someone with a disability represented in our family? Do we have somebody with autism in our family? Yes or no? Like, a lot of times parents that coming in from the mindset of we need to protect the kids from the cold, harsh realities, they are part of more of the dominant culture. Again, those families that are diverse, that do have people with disabilities in their family, that do have people of color or are people of color themselves, or maybe they have religion that is not the dominant religion in that state or in that country, those families don't have the luxury of ignoring the differences, because their realities are full of, unfortunately, a lot of being treated very differently due to those differences. So those families don't really have the opportunity to sort of shield their children from issues surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion. The important thing to kind of emphasize here is that children are exposed to messages about differences, regardless of how much you will try to keep them in a bubble, so to speak, or try to shield them or protect their innocence. Children are exposed to messages about diversity. If you do not teach them, they will fill in the gaps with the information that they have available to them. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. Kind of on the final topic about misconceptions, is that talking about diversity with your child is something that needs to happen once, sort of kind of like the talk whenever they get to a certain age and they need to learn about, sex ed and those types of things. That is not a subject that is covered all in one sitting, and it shouldn't be. And neither is talking about diversity. Diversity, equity, inclusion, those words, that concept is something that you can weave into your child's life regardless of their age. Even very young children, babies even, you can have conversations like this with them to sort of plant the seeds that you're going to have those conversations as they get older. It should be an ongoing situation, an ongoing conversation. Developmentally appropriate. How you talk about diversity with a 2-year-old is going to change over time. You're going to revisit it again and again and again. And in fact, if you're doing it sort of really effectively, you weave in conversations about diversity and inclusion in your everyday experiences. When you see families at the park, when you look at books at the library, when you watch a show together, all of those things have opportunities to have a very rich conversation about differences with your child. And again, remember, it's not about your child ignoring differences. It's about noticing the differences and understanding that those differences don't equate to differences in value, differences in intelligence, differences in anything, actually. I mean, richness in diversity is really where you want to focus your attention on. And there's opportunities for that everywhere. So this is not like something you sit your child down and say, let's talk about race, let's talk about diversity. It is sort of something that you want to incorporate into daily life with your kiddos. So doing this in that manner shows your child that it's okay to talk about differences, that it's not a dirty word, that it is not a topic that is unapproachable. And I mean, that's a really, really good example to set. Like in our family, we talk about people who have different skin colors. We talk about people who have different hair textures. We talk about people who have mobility aids, people who, have relationships that may be different than the relationship between myself and my children's dad. We talk about different family constellations, different makeups. Those are very, very rich conversations that can pop up daily with your children. And so look for opportunities. The other thing is, we don't want to shame our children when they maybe have not quite as a developed understanding about differences that we do. I don't expect my 6-year-old daughter to have as fully developed understanding about diversity that I do as a 31-year-old female, right? So when a child says something like, why is that girl's hair different than mine? What is wrong with that kid? What's on that baby's face, like a birthmark or something? Those are not opportunities to shame our children. Those are not opportunities to shh our children for pointing out differences. Remember, pointing out differences is not bad. So when our children do point out differences, it is really incumbent upon us as a caregiver to help teach them and guide them gently and respectfully. Again, it teaches them that differences are not something to be shushed, but that also differences are something to be normalized. Essentially, at the end of the day, you want your child to not see themselves as normal and everyone else as abnormal. For instance, I would not teach my child or help bolster the idea in my child that whiteness is somehow normal and everyone else that was not white was somehow abnormal. or that being able-bodied and not using a wheelchair is somehow normal, and then someone with a mobility aid is abnormal. We kind of want to get that mindset, that sort of, all or nothing thinking. We want to try to kind of, as much as we can, move away from that. And so there's all kinds of opportunities to do that out in the world. So I'll just give you kind of an example. This was my daughter's first year in kindergarten, and her teacher is Black and my daughter is white. And, I've tried to do sort of what I'm talking to you about today for her entire life of trying to, involve her in rich conversations about diversity. And so I was quite happy for her to have the opportunity to have a teacher who was racially different than her. And so she had came home from the first couple of days at kindergarten, and she was just enamored with her teacher's hair, who is her hair is of a much different texture than my daughter's. And in fact, my daughter's teacher has braids. And so I was able to use that opportunity of my daughter coming home and saying, "Mrs. Williams has braids. Oh my gosh, they're so cool." I was able to use that as a conversation to talk to my daughter about different hair textures, and even kind of, because we've talked about race a lot in my family, even kind of expand upon it into why people may wear different hairstyles and what a protective hairstyle might serve a person of Mrs. Williams's race and her hair texture. And my daughter's just, with her eyes like aglow, so happy to have this conversation. And so it could have been a very different. I could have really shied away from that. I could have really just said like, no, honey, everyone's the same, and we would have lost out on that. So I know that this has been a lot, and there may be some words that I've thrown around that you're like, Ashley, what are you talking about? Which brings me to sort of my first tip for you guys. Understanding diversity, and again, just these ideas of diversity, of equity, of inclusion, they start with you as the caregiver. Anything that you're going to sort of, pass through to your child and try to serve as a good influence for them, it's going to start with your understanding. It's going to start with your research, your absorbing of different materials, books, podcasts, due to this sort of environment that we're living with right now in 2020, there fortunately are so many resources available on YouTube, TED Talks, blogs, articles that talk about these very things. And actually, importantly, from the voices of these marginalized populations. And so there are articles, blogs, book lists from people of color about racial issues. Same for disabilities, same for neurodiversity, same for GLBTQ. There are so many voices that are just waiting to be absorbed. And so this journey of you sort of having these racial conversations, these conversations of diversity with your kids, they start with your understanding. And so if this whole talk has sort of been very confusing or overwhelming, that just might be an indicator to you to say, oh my gosh, like this is something that I need to research. This is something I need to get more comfortable with and expose myself to it so that I can serve as a good model to my child around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so another tip number 2 is look for cultural events in your community. Look for festivals, things in the community that are set up to share cultural information and share diverse information. It might not always be appropriate for people not of that culture or not of that religion to join into every single festival or every single religious ceremony, but there are certainly lots of opportunities to sort of expose yourself and expose your children to different cultures, to diversity in ways that celebrate those differences and celebrate those diverse opinions, diverse viewpoints, and really can show your children the unique perspectives that diversity brings to the world. And so definitely seek out those opportunities. Another tip is to consume media with your children and keep the conversation going. Unfortunately, our society is rife with stereotypes and sort of things in popular media. Those could be books, podcast, again, YouTube videos, movies, magazines, like portrayals on television, portrayals of characters that actually, are very stereotypical or are very harmful to marginalized populations. And so absorbing that media with your children, like sitting down and watching a movie with them, reading, a magazine with them, or being in proximity, it allows you to see what they're being exposed to and see those messages and have conversations about the equity issues or the inclusion issues with them live in the moment. And speaking about, media, especially if you've got young children, like little ones, it's very important that you spend a lot of time and effort to diversify your children's library and diversify their toy selection. And so don't always buy the baby doll of the dominant race or the race of your child. It is okay to buy toys, dolls that represent different ethnicities, that represent different abilities. You may have to reach out and Google or search deeper for representation in toys, but it's very well worth it to have your child exposed to diversity even from their first toys. On the table today, I've brought books from my kids' library at home that represent diversity. And so the books that you choose for your children, whether you have the resources to purchase books or even going to the library and searching out diverse books, it's so essential, because children, what they see represented in their toys and what they see represented in the books, that is going to shape their idea of the world. And we live in such a wonderful time that those toys are available and these books are available. And right now, in the current climate, lists upon lists of books are available to represent diversity in all its forms. Okay, I know that this has been a roller coaster ride, and I just wanted to emphasize that this is not meant to be some massive change in how you're doing stuff. Most people have a good, solid foundation core of values that they want to instill in their children. And at the top of most people's list is, I want my child to treat everyone with respect. I want them to treat everyone with dignity. I want them to, be a good friend, be a good peer. And I hope that you can take away from this talk today that celebrating diversity and truly celebrating it by talking to your children about it and incorporating it into your lives is a way to accomplish that. The end goal is the same, is for our child to live respectfully in this world and to embrace differences and to be a good friend. It's just that we might need to think a little bit more about intentionally working some of this stuff in. And so I don't want it to seem like you have to go out and purchase a desk full of books or attend 15 cultural events, okay? But it's enough if you're thinking about it. It's enough if you go through the store aisles and you're picking out a toy for your child, and you may pick the Barbie that comes with a mobility aid. You may consider buying a book that features a child with different kind of hair than your child has. You may consider a family outing to a cultural center that may not be from your own culture. So many things. This may even be to you like sort of a feeling of in your own self, hey, I might need to watch a couple of videos. I might need to read a couple articles. I might need to have, a conversation with a peer of mine about my thoughts about these things. It may even be that, and all of that's okay, because this is not a conversation that's going away. This is not a topic that is sort of a flavor of the week, hot on the news. Like, this is something that you will come up against as a parent, and it is so much easier to embrace the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion and start incorporating them into your parenting where you can, and not be afraid. We have to be brave. We have to be brave in how we approach this, and we have to do this as a model to our children who are living in a diverse world. And so I just hope that something about our talk today resonated with you. My email address is provided, so please feel free to reach out if you ever want to talk about these things. And also, if you have any commentary or feedback from me, and totally admit that I am not perfect and I do not always say things correctly or, represent all that I set out to do. And so if you have any comments or feedback for me, I would gladly welcome that. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to sit and have this discussion today. So thank you very much.